So just who is Yevgeny Prigozhin and what do we know about the leader of the Wagner private military company? Well, to answer that, let's bring in CNN's Shelma Abdelaziz in London. So Shelma, help us understand the players involved on the Wagner side here.
Yes, Yevgeny Prigozhin was once President Putin's secret weapon, and he is now very much the thorn in his side. He came from the same humble beginnings as President Putin in St. Petersburg. He knew him since the 1990s. He built an empire, a catering empire that led to that alias Putin chef, but it was really in the invasion of Crimea in 2014 when he began to rise to prominence as the head of the Wagner military group. He then used that group essentially as Putin's private army, carrying out his bidding in Africa, the Middle East. But all of that was done behind a curtain without Yevgeny Prigozhin claiming any credit at all. It was not until the invasion of Ukraine, Kim, when he really stepped into the limelight and did it as loudly and as antagonistically as he could, showing up the Russian military on the front lines in Ukraine time and time again, calling out Russia's military leadership, essentially starting a war of words with the defense minister of Russia, saying that he should be tried for failing his own people. And in these messages, and I know you're playing some of them right now, he's not just speaking to his own men, to his own mercenary group, he was talking to the Russian public at large. And that's why so many for months have asked the question, why has President Putin allowed this man not just to rise to a level of prominence, but to rise to a level of dissent, if you will, airing Russia's dirty laundry right on those front lines? We have an answer, if you will, now with President Putin's statement today, who has accused Yevgeny Prigozhin of treason, said he will be held accountable, as you mentioned. But is it too late to contain a man who now says he has 25,000 soldiers, 25,000 mercenaries armed and ready to defend him, who's taking control of a city in the south, part of the military command of the south in Russia? This is a huge and complicated challenge for President Putin, and it's playing out right in front of everyone's eyes.
Yeah, absolutely. The whole world watching. So, Shelma, it might be hard to predict at this point, but what could be Prigozhin's fate here?
It is absolutely hard to predict. I mean, this is an unprecedented situation. President Putin himself invoked history dating back over 100 years when talking about this situation, likening it to a rebellion, a coup, an attempt to overthrow the authority of Russia. That means he absolutely must respond with force. But again, what does that force look like when you have Yevgeny Prigozhin holed up again in Rostov with his soldiers, with his men ready to defend him, he says? And how does President Putin now turn to the Russian military and those top military brass leaders that he allowed to be antagonized and publicly humiliated by Prigozhin for months without appearing weak, without essentially owing them in the coming days? What is most concerning, I think, is of course the possibility of this turning bloody. Yevgeny Prigozhin seems all in. He's already raided across the border, entered Russian territory, taken control of a city, and said he is willing to do anything to defend himself and his group. Is the Russian military willing to do the same? One can only assume so, given President Putin's very strong words. Does that mean Russians fighting Russians on Russian soil in the coming days? All of this, of course, pushes the Ukraine war in the background when we're speaking about President Putin simply trying to defend his throne.